Right now, NVIDIA is worth more than the entire German stock market. More than Apple was in 2018. More than any chip company in history by a distance so large it barely makes sense to compare. But here's the thing that nobody tells you about NVIDIA's rise. It was never supposed to happen this way. The company didn't predict the AI revolution. It didn't engineer a grand plan to monopolize artificial intelligence. What it did, quietly, stubbornly across 2 decades of crises, near collapses, and industry upheavals, was something far more interesting. It became anti-fragile. Most companies break under pressure. A few survive it. NVIDIA did something rarer. It got stronger from it. Every crisis, every market shock, every existential threat, each one left NVIDIA not just intact, but more powerful than before. How does that happen? How does a company built to make video game graphics end up controlling the infrastructure of the most important technological shift in human history? That's what we're going to find out. It's 1993. Three engineers, Jensen Huang, Chris Malachowski, and Curtis Priam, sit in a Denny's in San Jose and decide to build a company around the single obsession: graphics. Not software, not the internet, not enterprise systems, just the problem of making computers see the world the way humans do, in 3 dimensions, in color, in motion. The insight was deceptively simple. The human visual system is the most demanding real-time processing task a computer could ever be asked to perform. To render a convincing 3D world, tracking light, shadow, texture, perspective across millions of pixels 60 times a second, you couldn't do it with a regular processor working through task one at a time. You needed something different, something that could do thousands of calculations simultaneously. You needed parallel processing, and you needed to build a chip from the ground up around that idea. That was NVIDIA's founding belief. And in 1999, they codified it with a product that changed everything: the GeForce 256, the world's first GPU, graphics processing unit, a chip that didn't just help your computer draw pictures, it thought in pictures. The gaming market exploded, NVIDIA grew, and for a while the story seemed straightforward: a focused company, a clear market, a brilliant product. But the tech industry is never straightforward for long. Nassim Nicholas Taleb, the mathematician and philosopher who would later write the book Antifragile, describes 3 kinds of things in this world. Fragile things break under stress. Think a wine glass. Apply enough pressure and it shatters, and it doesn't come back stronger. Robust things resist stress. They stay the same. A rock. You can hammer it and it remains a rock, neither better or worse. And then there's the third category, the one most people have never considered. Anti-fragile things don't just resist stress, they improve from it. Like a muscle that tears slightly during exercise and rebuilds stronger. Like an immune system that encounters a pathogen and learns to defeat it forever. Most technology companies are fragile. They're built for the conditions of their founding, and they pray those conditions persist. NVIDIA, in the early 2000s, had every reason to be fragile. The dot-com crash of 2001 wiped out the speculative frenzy that had been fueling the PC gaming market. Consumer spending collapsed. NVIDIA stock fell off a cliff. Then came a more dangerous threat: a direct, sustained technical assault from a competitor that nearly ended everything. ATI Technologies, later acquired by AMD, went to war for NVIDIA for a dominance of the graphics card market. And for a period in the mid-2000s, ATI was winning. Their Radeon chips were faster, cooler, more efficient. The gaming press was turning. Retailers were shifting shelf space. For a one-product company in a 2-horse race, this was existential. But here is where NVIDIA made a decision that, at the time, looked like desperation, and in hindsight was the most important strategic bet in the history of modern computing. They started building something for which there was almost no immediate market, no clear customer, no obvious revenue. They called it CUDA, and it would change everything. CUDA, Compute Unified Device Architecture. Announced in 2006, the idea was simple to state and staggering in implication. What if the GPU, this chip built to process thousands of graphics calculations in parallel, could be reprogrammed to process anything in parallel? Not just pixels, numbers, data, scientific simulations, fluid dynamics, molecular modeling, anything that could be broken into thousands of simultaneous calculations, which, it turned out, was almost everything interesting in science and mathematics. Jensen Huang made a decision that many inside the company questioned at the time. NVIDIA would invest hundreds of millions of dollars building tools, libraries, and the software ecosystem that would let researchers, not gamers, researchers, program GPUs for general-purpose computing. There was no product-market fit, no clear path to revenue. The gaming division was the business. CUDA was a bet. But here is where antifragility enters the story, because the pressure that would have destroyed a fragile company, the brutal competition from ATI, the cyclical downturns in gaming, the constant threat of obsolescence, that same pressure forced NVIDIA to diversify, to look beyond its single market, to build optionality into its very DNA. Optionality is one of Taleb's core principles of antifragility. It means positioning yourself so that multiple possible futures are good for you, not just one. A fragile company bets everything on one outcome. An anti-fragile company builds capabilities that can be redirected wherever the world decides to go. CUDA was optionality made tangible. And then, in 2012, the world decided where it was going. A team of researchers at the University of Toronto, led by a quiet academic named Geoffrey Hinton, entered a computer vision competition called AlexNet. They used a deep neural network running on NVIDIA GPUs. They didn't just win, they won by such a margin that the entire field of AI stopped what it was doing and looked up. That result, AlexNet, is now considered the starting gun of the modern AI era, and it ran on CUDA. The academics who had been quietly using NVIDIA's platform for years suddenly became the most important people in technology, and every major tech company in the world, Google, Meta, Microsoft, Amazon, needed what those researchers needed. They needed GPUs. Specifically, they needed NVIDIA GPUs, because NVIDIA had spent 8 years building the only software ecosystem, the libraries, the tools, the developer community, sophisticated enough to run cutting-edge AI at scale. The crisis that had pushed NVIDIA toward CUDA, the competitive pressure, the market volatility, the desperate need to find new uses for its technology, quietly built a moat so deep that competitors would spend the next decade trying and failing to cross it. AMD had chips, Intel had chips, Google built its own custom AI processors, but nobody had CUDA. Nobody had 8 years of developer adoption. Nobody had the ecosystem. This is anti-fragility in its purest form. The volatility didn't just fail to break NVIDIA. The volatility built NVIDIA's greatest competitive advantage, piece by piece over years, in ways nobody could have planned. And it didn't stop there. When the cryptocurrency mining boom hit in 2017, it was GPUs that miners needed for the parallel calculations that secured blockchain transactions. NVIDIA's data center revenue doubled, then doubled again. When the crypto market crashed in 2018, an event that devastated companies built on crypto, NVIDIA absorbed the shock, rebalanced, and moved on. It didn't shatter, it adapted. When the pandemic hit in 2020 and the world went remote, cloud infrastructure exploded, gaming exploded, AI research accelerated. Every trend that the crisis created pointed back to NVIDIA. Each shock, each crisis, each upheaval, stronger. Jensen Huang has a saying he returns to again and again. Our company is 30 days from disaster at all times. Not as a warning, as a philosophy, as the thing that keeps NVIDIA from ever becoming complacent, from ever becoming fragile. The awareness of fragility, held constantly, clearly, without denial, is precisely what prevents it. By 2023, the world had caught up to what NVIDIA had been quietly building for 20 years. ChatGPT launched. The AI gold rush began. Every company on Earth suddenly needed to train and run large language models. And training a large language model requires one thing above all others: NVIDIA GPUs, running CUDA. The waiting list for NVIDIA's H100 chips stretched to 12 months. CEOs were calling Jensen Huang personally. Countries were negotiating for allocations. The United States government put export controls on NVIDIA chips because they had become so strategically important that controlling them was like controlling oil. A gaming chip company, 30 years old, built in a Denny's. This is the $3 trillion accident. Except it was never really an accident. It was the result of a company that had been forced by circumstance to become anti-fragile, to build capabilities broader than any single market, to maintain optionality across multiple possible futures, to treat disorder not as a threat to be managed, but as a resource to be exploited. NVIDIA didn't predict the AI revolution. It positioned itself so that when the revolution came, whatever form it took, NVIDIA would be essential to it. That is the anti-fragile advantage.
So, what does NVIDIA's story mean for you?
Because antifragility isn't a corporate strategy. It's a design principle, and it applies to careers, projects, and individual lives just as much as it applies to billion-dollar companies. Most of us are building fragile systems and calling them plans. One income stream, one skill set, one industry, one outcome we're betting everything on. It feels like focus, it feels disciplined, but it's exposure. And when the market shifts, and it always shifts, fragile systems shatter. NVIDIA showed us a different way. First, seek optionality. Build capabilities that can serve multiple futures, not just the future you're predicting. CUDA wasn't built for AI, it was built for possibility. The researchers and the use cases came later. What you can do in 10 directions is more valuable than what you can do in one. Second, make small bets on things that don't have obvious payoffs yet. NVIDIA invested in CUDA for 8 years before it paid off commercially. 8 years of cost with no clear return. Most organizations, most people give up in 8 months. The bets that compound slowest are often the ones that compound longest. Third, let disorder teach you. Every crisis NVIDIA faced, the ATI wars, the dot-com crash, the crypto bust, left behind information. What held up, what broke, where the real strengths were. Fragile companies hide from that information. Anti-fragile ones collect it. And fourth, perhaps most counterintuitively, stay aware of your fragility. Jensen Huang's 30 Days from Disaster philosophy is not pessimism. It is the opposite of complacency. The companies that assume they are safe are the ones that stop building the capabilities that would save them. The question isn't whether disorder is coming, it always is. The question is what you're building that will get stronger when it arrives. If NVIDIA's anti-fragile journey from gaming crisis to AI monopoly hit different for you, hit that like button. It genuinely helps more people find this kind of content. Subscribe for more breakdowns of the strategies and ideas behind the companies reshaping the world, because there is no shortage of stories like this one. And drop a comment. Where do you see anti-fragility at play in the world today? I read every single one. I'll see you in the next one.